Think of the person you despise most in the world, that corrupt politician, the manipulative co-worker, the relative who personifies arrogance. Feel the revulsion, the righteous anger that this image evokes in you. Now, for the most difficult and liberating truth that psychology has ever dared to utter. Everything you hate in that person is a lost and denied fragment of yourself. This monster you see out there is merely the reflection of an exile, living in the basement of your soul, screaming to be acknowledged. We call this exile the shadow, and the journey to wholeness does not begin by fighting it, but by having the courage to ask its name. This video is not for the faint of heart. It is a scalpel for the soul. In the next few minutes, we will descend into this darkness together, not to get lost in it, but to rescue the gold it holds. If you are afraid of what you might find, close this window now. But if the pain of living an incomplete life has become greater than the fear of the unknown, then you are in the right place. Do this now. Subscribe to the channel, not as a spectator, but as an initiate on this journey. Turn on notifications, as each video will be a step on the map of your inner world. Give it a like as an act of intention, a signal to your unconscious that you are ready to look, and leave a comment with the word journey, so I know you have crossed the threshold with us. What we will do here today will forever change the way you see yourself and the world. That is the promise. The risk is all yours. We pride ourselves on our consciousness as if it were the pinnacle of creation. We believe we are the captain of our ship, the master of our destiny, wielding the rudder of reason and logic with unshakable confidence. This small point of light, which we call the I or ego, is our fortress. Within its walls, everything seems orderly. Our plans for the week, our political opinions, the story we tell ourselves about who we are. The ego is a brilliant administrator, a tireless organizer of reality. Its function is to create a coherent narrative from the chaos of existence, to give us a sense of identity, of separation, of control. It tells us, you are this, and not that. The world works this way, and not some other way. And we believe it, because the alternative is terrifying. The truth, however, is that this well-lit castle is, in reality, a small island floating on an unfathomable, nocturnal ocean. We believe the island is all that exists, and we spend our entire lives mapping every inch of its sand, ignoring the leviathan that sleeps in the depths. Consciousness, by its very nature, is selective. For us to function, it must filter, repress, and exclude a colossal amount of information, feelings, and instincts. Everything that does not fit the idealized self-image the ego has built is pushed into the shadows, into the vast submerged continent of the unconscious. This is why we are so full of contradictions. We preach peace but delight in violent movies. We value fidelity but are haunted by forbidden fantasies. We champion logic but make our most important decisions based on inexplicable impulses. These are not flaws in the system, they are proof of the other side's existence. They are the tides of the great ocean crashing against the fragile walls of our island. The first task of individuation, the call to become whole, is to develop the humility to recognize the tyranny of the ego. It is to understand that consciousness is not the king, but a servitor, at best, a minister to a much greater power, the self, the totality of our being. As long as the ego says, I am the center, we will live in a state of perpetual conflict, spending immense energy to maintain the illusion of control, rowing furiously against a current that will, inevitably, take us where it wants to go. The true journey begins when the ego, exhausted by its own arrogance, finally turns to the ocean and asks, who else is here? This is the moment the veil of consciousness begins to tear, revealing an inner world infinitely richer, more dangerous, and more real than the little play we were staging on the surface. It is the beginning of terror and glory. It is the call to the adventure of a lifetime. Once we accept the existence of the ocean, we must learn to navigate its waters. Jung offers us a map, dividing this vast territory into two major regions, the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious. The first is the more superficial layer, the one just beneath our conscious island. Imagine it as a personal archive, a locked basement where we store everything that belongs uniquely to our biography, but has been repressed for being painful, shameful, or simply irrelevant to the ego. There lie the childhood memories we prefer to forget, the talents we abandoned for fear of failure, the traumas that scarred us, the passions we did not allow ourselves to live. This is the realm of complexes, as Jung called them, clusters of psychic energy around an emotional core, which act like secondary personalities within us. When you react disproportionately to criticism, it is an inferiority complex that has been activated. When you repeatedly fall in love with the same type of person who will make you suffer, it is a mother or father complex that is in command. The personal unconscious speaks to us through dreams with familiar figures, memory lapses, neurotic symptoms, and the repetitive patterns that sabotage our happiness. It is personal because its content is unique to each of us, formed by our life experiences. Initial therapeutic work focuses on bringing the contents of this archive into the light of consciousness, not to judge it, but to integrate it, freeing the energy that was trapped in repression. But if we dive deeper, beyond our personal memories and wounds, the waters become darker, denser, and strangely universal. We arrive at the collective unconscious. This is no longer our personal archive. It is the library of humanity itself. It is the psychic inheritance we all share, regardless of our culture, race, or era. It is the sediment of millions of years of human experience, a living system of primordial patterns and images that Jung called archetypes. This realm contains not personal memories, but the matrices of all possible experiences: birth, death, love, betrayal, the confrontation with power, the search for meaning. This is why myths, fairy tales, and religious symbols from cultures that never had contact with each other are so astonishingly similar. They spring from the same common source. Dreaming of a universal flood during a personal crisis is not about a memory of a flood, but about the activation of the archetype of destruction and renewal. Feeling an irresistible call to a great adventure is to be possessed by the hero archetype. The collective unconscious is the bedrock of our psyche. It is the source of our deepest creativity, our most accurate intuition, and also our most terrifying psychosis. Confusing the personal with the collective is a dangerous mistake. Trying to solve an archetypal problem with the ego's logic is like trying to empty the ocean with a bucket. The journey of individuation requires us to become skilled navigators, capable of distinguishing personal currents from collective tides, learning to honor and dialogue with the ancestral forces that live within us without being swallowed by them. The collective unconscious is not a void, but a universe populated by powerful forces. The archetypes, they are not inherited ideas, but inherited predispositions to create images and react to them. They are like dry riverbeds in the psyche, which the water of life experience fills. They are the characters in the eternal drama of the human soul, and we are the actors who give them a body and a voice, often without the slightest awareness of it. Among the countless archetypes, some stand out for their constant influence on our daily lives. The persona is the first we encounter. It is our social mask, the face we show the world to be accepted, to fulfill our role as a good son, a competent professional, or an exemplary citizen. The persona is necessary for social life, but the danger lies in identifying with it. When we believe we are the mask, we lose contact with our true self, resulting in a feeling of emptiness, inauthenticity, and exhaustion. The journey requires that we learn to use the persona without becoming it. In the depths, we find the shadow, the archetype of everything we repress and deny in ourselves. It is our other self, the dark twin. Although we see it as negative, the shadow also contains repressed positive qualities, our golden shadow, such as the assertiveness we confuse with aggression or the sensuality we fear as vulgar. The integration of the shadow is the first and most difficult test of courage on the inner journey. Next, we encounter the archetypes that represent our inner sexual counterpart. In the psyche of a man resides the anima, the inner image of the feminine. Initially, she is projected onto real women, causing blind passion and the idealization of romantic love. As a man matures, he must withdraw this projection and integrate his anima, developing qualities like intuition, sensitivity, and the capacity for relatedness. In the psyche of a woman resides the animus, the inner image of the masculine. When projected, he can lead to a search for a savior or a blind admiration for powerful men. By integrating her animus, a woman develops qualities like logical thought, courage, and the power to act in the world. Dialogue with these archetypes is the key to wholeness. Finally, at the center of the psyche resides the ordering archetype, the goal of the entire journey, the self. The self is the archetype of totality, of the union of all opposites. It is both the center and the circumference of the psyche, encompassing both the conscious and the unconscious. The ego orbits the self, just as the earth orbits the sun. The process of individuation is the gradual journey in which the ego cedes its false throne and places itself in service of the self, allowing this totality to manifest in the world. The self communicates with us through dreams of authority figures, kings, queens, symbols of wholeness, circles, mandalas, and moments of synchronicity. It is our inner guide, the silent voice that calls us to become who we truly are. To ignore these inhabitants of the abyss is to live like a puppet whose strings are pulled by forces we do not understand. To know them is to begin the dialogue that transforms us from victims of fate into co-creators of our own reality. No journey of self-knowledge can even begin without the confrontation with the shadow. This is the gateway, the guardian of the threshold that separates the boy from the man, the girl from the woman. The shadow is our double, our photographic negative. Everything that the ego, in its desire to be good, pure, and acceptable, decided it was not, was relegated to this dark realm. Our laziness, our envy, our cruelty, our uncontrolled libido, all of this and more makes up what we call our dark side. The mechanism we use to maintain this illusion of purity is projection. Since we cannot bear to see the darkness in ourselves, we project it onto others. The moral fanatic, who sees sin everywhere, is fighting desperately against his own repressed impulses. The individual who constantly complains about the dishonesty of others carries a latent dishonesty within himself. War, prejudice, and witch hunts in all their forms are collective manifestations of shadow projection. It is always easier to fight evil out there than to confront the abyss in here. The integration of the shadow is, therefore, an act of immense moral responsibility. It means taking back our projections, one by one, and admitting, this thing that irritates me so much in the other is also me. This work is the antithesis of perfection. The goal is not to become a saint, but a complete human being. Sainthood is often just a well-constructed persona, which casts a gigantic shadow. Wholeness, on the other hand, accepts light and darkness as inseparable parts of the whole. But the shadow does not only contain psychological garbage. In it, as already mentioned, resides the golden shadow, valuable qualities and potentials that were repressed along with the negative aspects, often due to fear or family and cultural conditioning. The spontaneous, creative child who was taught to be serious and responsible may have repressed his joy for life. The woman taught to be sweet and submissive may have exiled her strength and leadership power. The confrontation with the shadow, therefore, is not just an exercise in humility, but also an act of rescue. By descending into the basement, we find not only monsters, but also forgotten treasures, sources of vitality and creativity that were stolen from us. The process of integration is painful. It requires us to abandon our idealized self-image and accept our paradoxical nature. It is not about unleashing the shadow and acting destructively, but about bringing it into consciousness, dialoguing with it, and integrating its energy constructively. Repressed aggression, when made conscious, can transform into assertiveness and the courage to defend our boundaries. Repressed libido can become a source of passion for life and artistic creativity. The integrated shadow does not make us evil, it makes us real. It gives us substance, depth, and compassion, for only one who acknowledges their own darkness can truly understand and forgive the darkness in others. To flee from the shadow is to condemn oneself to a superficial and lifeless existence. To embrace it is the act of courage that allows us, finally, to claim our wholeness. The great drama of human life, staged on the silent theater of the psyche, is the relationship between the ego and the self. In the beginning of life, they are one, in the paradisiacal unity of infancy. But for us to become individuals, the ego must emerge, differentiate itself, say I. This is a necessary and heroic step. The ego is the center of consciousness, the agent of our will, the hero who must leave the village, the unconscious, to explore the world. During the first half of life, the main task is to strengthen the ego, build a career, start a family, find our place in society. It is an outward movement of expansion, of conquering the external world. The danger, known as ego inflation, occurs when the ego forgets its origin. It falls in love with its own image, believes it is the center of the universe, and completely identifies with its achievements and its persona. It becomes a petty tyrant, ruling the psyche with an iron fist, suppressing anything that threatens its control. It is at this point, usually in midlife, that crisis strikes. A divorce, the loss of a job, an illness, or simply an overwhelming feeling of emptiness and meaninglessness. These are the calls from the self. The self, the totality, the central archetype, is knocking on the door of the ego's castle, demanding to be recognized. The self does not want to destroy the ego, but to put it in its proper place. The perfect metaphor is that of the king and his kingdom. The ego is the king, but the kingdom, the entire psyche, is the self. A good king serves his kingdom. A bad king believes the kingdom exists to serve him. The second half of life, therefore, should be a journey of return, an inward movement. The task is no longer to conquer the world, but to explore the inner universe. It is the process of individuation, in which the personality's center of gravity gradually shifts from the ego to the self. This does not mean the ego disappears. On the contrary, a strong and healthy ego is a prerequisite for this journey. A weak ego would simply be dissolved by the forces of the unconscious. What changes is its function. The ego ceases to be the master and becomes the servant, the partner, the mediator between the inner and outer worlds. It learns to listen to the voice of the self, which manifests through dreams, intuition, and synchronicities, and to translate that wisdom into action in the real world. This power shift is a surrender, a crucifixion for the ego. It must let go of the illusion of control, of its omnipotence, and accept that it is part of something much greater. It is a painful process, full of resistance and fear. The ego fears being annihilated, swallowed by the ocean of the unconscious. But what happens is the opposite. By surrendering to the self, the ego finds its true strength and purpose. It ceases to be an isolated tyrant and becomes a channel for the wisdom of the whole. Life ceases to be a struggle for power and status and becomes a collaboration with destiny. To live from the self is to find our axis, our center of peace amidst the chaos. It is to feel connected to something greater than our small I, to act in the world not out of compulsion, but from a sense of vocation. It is the transition from a merely successful life to a meaningful one. How does the self, the great archetype of totality, communicate with the small and limited ego? Certainly not through the logical and direct language that consciousness values. The unconscious speaks its own language, an archaic, poetic, and universal language, the language of symbols. A symbol, in the Jungian perspective, is not a mere sign that points to something known. A symbol is the best possible expression for something that is still unknown, that transcends rational understanding. It is a bridge between the visible and the invisible world, the conscious and the unconscious. The cross, the mandala, the serpent biting its own tail are burrows. These are not mere drawings. They are condensers of a profound and paradoxical meaning that the logical mind cannot grasp. The unconscious produces symbols spontaneously, and the place where this production is most prolific is in dreams. For Jung, dreams are not, as for Freud, primarily a disguised fulfillment of repressed wishes. Dreams are the voice of nature within us, an honest and direct attempt by the unconscious to communicate something to consciousness, to compensate for the ego's one-sided attitudes. If the ego is excessively materialistic, dreams may bring spiritual images. If consciousness is too rigid and controlling, dreams may be chaotic and wild. They are like a nightly bulletin on the state of our inner ecosystem. The interpretation of a dream does not seek to decipher it like a secret code, but to dialogue with its images. The question is not what does this dream mean, but why did the unconscious choose this image to show me at this moment? The analysis involves amplifying the symbols, connecting them not only with the dreamer's personal life subjective context, but also with mythology, fairy tales, and religion objective or archetypal context, to unveil the layers of meaning. Another form of communication from the self is synchronicity. Jung defined this concept as a meaningful coincidence and a causal connecting principle. It is the simultaneous occurrence of two events, one psychic, a thought, dream, or feeling, and one physical, an event in the outer world, that have no cause and effect relationship, but are connected by. Meaning, you think of a friend you haven't seen in years, and 5 minutes later, he calls you. You have a distressing dream about a scarab beetle, and the next morning, a very similar insect hits your office window. To the rational mind, this is mere chance. For Jung, these are moments when the inner and outer worlds align, when the self manifests in the fabric of reality, showing that psyche and matter are not as separate as we think. Synchronicity often occurs in times of great transformation or crisis, functioning as a sign, a confirmation, or a warning from the self. It is the universe whispering in our ear, reminding us that we are part of a larger, more mysterious pattern. Learning to read the language of symbols, to honor the wisdom of dreams, and to recognize moments of synchronicity is to open a direct channel of communication with the deepest center of our being. It is to allow the ego to be guided not just by its own flickering light, but by the ancient and comprehensive wisdom of the self. In the theater of social life, we all wear masks. The word persona comes from Latin and refers to the mask that actors wore in Greco-Roman theater, which served to identify the character and amplify their voice. In Jung's psychology, the persona is the archetype of social adaptation. It is the face we construct for the world, an interface between our ego and society. It is composed of the roles we play: the dedicated professional, the loving father, the loyal friend, the brilliant intellectual. The persona is not, in itself, something negative. On the contrary, it is an essential tool. It protects us, allows us to navigate different social contexts with fluidity, and facilitates coexistence. Without a functional persona, we would be like exposed nerves, unable to cope with the demands and harshness of the external world. The problem, and it is an epidemic problem in our culture, rises with identification. This occurs when the ego merges with the persona, when the person believes that they are the mask they wear. The professor who is a professor even at the breakfast table, the doctor who never abandons his authoritative stance, the nice guy who can never say no. All are prisoners of their own creation. This identification leads to a profound self-alienation. Life becomes a constant performance. The person becomes overly concerned with the opinions of others, with maintaining their image, and spends a colossal amount of energy hiding everything that does not fit the character. Their doubts, their weaknesses, their inappropriate feelings. The inevitable result is a feeling of emptiness, of falsehood, of not knowing who one really is behind the mask. It is the feeling of being a fraud in one's own life. Behind a rigid and overdeveloped persona, there is usually a neglected inner life and an immense shadow. The more perfect the mask, the darker and more chaotic the material it hides. A nervous breakdown, depression, or a midlife crisis is often the moment when the unconscious rebels against the tyranny of the persona, forcing the person to look at what has been neglected. The process of individuation requires a painful but necessary stripping away. It is not about destroying the persona and walking through the world naked and vulnerable, but about differentiating it from the ego. It is about recognizing that the mask is a tool, not your identity. The goal is to develop a flexible persona, which we can put on and take off as needed, without ever forgetting who we are when we are alone. This requires the courage to be authentic, to show vulnerability, to accept that we are not the ideal we project. It is the process of taking back the power we gave to the gaze of the other, and returning it to our inner center, the self. When this happens, life ceases to be a performance and becomes a genuine expression of our being. We discover that true connection with others comes not from our perfection, but from our shared humanity. To free oneself from the tyranny of the persona is to trade the world's superficial admiration for the deep and silent approval of one's own soul. Individuation is the central concept of Jung's psychology and the ultimate goal of human life. It is not about individualism, about isolating oneself from the world, but rather about becoming an individual in the sense of being indivisible, whole one. It is the process by which a person becomes who they truly are in their unique totality, differentiating themselves from the collective consciousness, but without disconnecting from it. It is the realization of the self. This journey can be compared to the hero's journey, present in all myths. It begins with a call, usually in the form of a painful crisis that shatters the structures of the old life. The hero, the ego, is forced to leave the known world and enter the dark forest of the unconscious. The first great challenge is the encounter with the shadow. The hero must confront his double, his dark side, and integrate it, recognizing that the evil he saw in the world also dwells within him. This is a test of humility and courage. If successful, the hero gains an ally and reclaims an immense amount of psychic energy. The next step of the journey is the encounter with the anima animus. The hero must learn to relate to his inner counterpart, the soul. This involves withdrawing the projections he placed on romantic partners and developing an inner dialogue with this archetypal figure. For a man, it means developing his capacity to feel and relate eros. For a woman, her capacity to think and discern logos. This encounter transforms how the person relates to the opposite sex and to themselves. As the journey deepens, the hero encounters other archetypes, such as the wise old man or the great mother, which represent the forces of wisdom and the nurturing or devouring unconscious. He learns to receive guidance from these inner figures, developing his intuition and his connection to ancestral wisdom. The climax of the journey is the encounter with the self. This is the moment when the ego recognizes that it is not the center of the psychic universe and submits to a higher power. It is an experience of profound transformation, often described in mystical or religious terms. The ego is not destroyed but relativized. It finds its true place as the servant of the self. The result of this journey is wholeness, not perfection, which is a neurotic and unattainable ideal, but the ability to contain the opposites within oneself, conscious and unconscious, masculine and feminine, light and darkness, good and evil. The symbol of this totality is the mandala, the magic circle that represents the realized self. An individuated person is not free from conflict, but is able to live it consciously, without identifying unilaterally with one side. They are able to be in the world without being of the world. It is important to emphasize that individuation is a unique and solitary path. There are no 10 steps or a ready-made formula. Each person's path is dictated by their own unconscious, by their own dreams and complexes. It is a lifelong process, a spiral in which the same themes are revisited at ever deeper levels. It is the most difficult task a human being can undertake, but also the only one that can bring lasting meaning to their existence. Jung found in the symbolic language of alchemy the perfect metaphor for the process of individuation. The ancient alchemists, under the guise of trying to turn lead into gold, were in fact projecting a drama of psychological transformation onto the chemical process. The great work magnum opus was not the creation of material gold, but the liberation of the soul, the creation of the golden man, the self. The alchemical process can be divided into 3 or 4 main stages, which correspond directly to the stages of the inner journey. The first stage is the nigredo, or the blackening. It begins with the prima materia, the raw material, which is the chaotic and undifferentiated state of the psyche of the common man, who lives unconscious of his inner conflicts. The nigredo is the phase of dissolution, of putrefaction. Psychologically, it corresponds to the confrontation with the shadow. It is a period of depression, of loss of meaning, of disorientation. When the ego encounters its dark side and all its certainties are undone, it is the dark night of the soul. The person must cook in their own juices, face what they have repressed, without running away. It is the most difficult and painful stage, but absolutely necessary. Without the death of the old self, nothing new can be born. If the nigredo is endured consciously, it gives way to the albedo, the whitening. After the darkness, the first light appears. It is the stage of purification, of washing ablatio. Psychologically, it corresponds to the illumination that comes from confronting the shadow and, especially, from integrating the anima animus. The individual begins to differentiate from their projections and emotions. There is a new clarity, an ability to see oneself and others more objectively. The soul, once imprisoned in the dark matter of complexes, begins to break free. It is a state of peace, of reflection, but it is not yet the end of the work. The albedo can be a lunar state, cold and disembodied. It lacks the warmth and color of life. The third stage is the rubedo, the reddening. It is here that blood, passion, and life return, but in a new and conscious way. It corresponds to the final union of opposites, the coniunctio, the sacred marriage of the king and queen, of the conscious and the unconscious. The self is realized. The person is no longer in conflict with themselves, but lives their totality. The rubedo is not a state of heavenly perfection, but of full incarnation. The individuated person lives their life in the world, with passion and purpose, but anchored in their inner center. The goal that has been created is not the absence of suffering, but the ability to find meaning in it. The transformation of lead the unconscious man, heavy and ruled by his instincts, into gold the individuated man, conscious, who reflects the light of the self, is the result of this long and arduous psychological distillation. Alchemy teaches us that the most valuable treasure, lapis philosophorum, the philosopher's stone, is not found in the heavens, but in the most vile and despised matter, our own shadow. It is the act of embracing what we reject that, paradoxically, liberates us and makes us whole. We arrive at the pinnacle and, at the same time, the heart of Jungian psychology, the coniunctio oppositorum, the union of opposites. The human psyche is a constellation of polarities, conscious and unconscious, masculine and feminine, logos and eros, thinking and feeling, introversion and extroversion, light and darkness, good and evil. The natural tendency of the Western ego, influenced by a tradition that values logic and one-sided morality, is to choose one pole and repress the other. We want to be good, and we deny our evil. We want to be rational, and we despise our emotions. We want to be light, and we fear our darkness. The result of this split is neurosis. The energy of the repressed pole does not disappear. It accumulates in the unconscious, becoming autonomous, destructive, and projecting itself onto the world. An excessively rational person will be haunted by childish emotions. A society that preaches purity will produce the most depraved pornography in its shadows. Individuation, therefore, is not a path of purification in the sense of eliminating the negative pole. It is a path of integration. The goal is not perfection, which is death, but wholeness, which is life. Wholeness implies the ability to hold the tension of opposites within oneself without breaking. The ultimate symbol of this union is the alchemical wedding, the union of the king consciousness, sun, logos, and the queen unconscious, moon, eros. From this marriage, the divine child is born, the philosopher's stone, the realized self. To live the coniunctio does not mean to be lukewarm or indecisive. On the contrary, it means being able to live each pole with intensity, but without permanently identifying with it. It means having the ability to be strong and vulnerable, to think clearly and feel deeply, to act in the world and to retreat in contemplation. It means, above all, removing moral judgment from the equation. Darkness is not evil. It is simply the other side of light. The unconscious is not an enemy. It is the necessary partner of consciousness. Accepting this paradoxical reality is what frees us from the tyranny of perfection and allows us to be fully human. The self, as the archetype of totality, is the force that orchestrates this union. It is, in itself, a paradox, the point of union between the finite and the infinite, the temporal and the eternal. The experience of the self is the experience of feeling, at the same time, a unique and separate individual, and part of the entire web of existence. It is finding the center that holds all our contradictions. The journey from the conscious to the unconscious, therefore, is completed not with an arrival, but with a return. We return to the world, but transformed. We no longer see the world in black and white, but in an infinity of shades. We no longer judge so quickly, for we recognize the other's shadow as a mirror of our own. We no longer seek happiness in external achievements, but in the dynamic balance of our inner world. And we understand, finally, that the purpose of life was not to reach a destination, but to dance to the complex and, at times, dissonant music of our own unique totality.